going forward, we've got different suites of animals in these different blocks. So in the middle block, we have the longhorn cattle, we've got Exmoor ponies, we've got fallow deer, red deer, and the odd roe deer. And previously, we have had the Tamworth pigs in this area as well. In the northern block, we only have the cattle. And in the southern block, we have all of the different animals. But we're hoping over time that we can get a variety of other animals up in the northern block to complement just the cattle up there at the moment. So this is a rewilding project, the three areas I just showed you. We've also got land around Shipley Village here, which has just sort of been taken back in hand again. Some of it was tenanted or pony paddocks. And the really exciting thing here is actually we've got a regenerative farm, and I'll tell you a bit more about that later on. So that sits alongside the rewilding project, and that's all about farming for nature, about soil health, mob grazing, and that kind of thing. So that's a very exciting new venture we started last year. So I think that's kind of put all of the estate into context. Now I'm going to talk a bit about the herbivores. So these are the animals that we have that are doing all the hard work for us. It's all about the processes that these animals bring, the natural processes. So for example, we've got the Old English longhorn cattle here on the top left, and they are proxies. They're sort of mimicking their ancestors in the landscape. So they're proxies for the wild oxen, which is called the aurochs, which was extinct a few hundred years ago. The idea behind these animals is that they're grazing and browsing, because like all of the animals at Knepp, we're not supplementary feeding. So they have to make their own living all year round. They're not brought in at night. They're not brought in the winter. They're out all year round. And the idea is that, if you're supplementary feeding animals, you are creating a habit that they come back to the same place at the same time every day to get fed, and they become reliant on that, and they won't bother foraging for their own food. If they're being left to make their own living, they have to forage to find their own food. And it's amazing how creative they'll be with that when they know that they've got to rely on themselves to find their own food. And so that in turn is fighting back against the succession that we're seeing at Knepp, especially so in the southern block, where you've got emerging scrub. We've got all these lovely sort of different scrub species coming up. But if we left it without any animals there, you'd soon have succession happening and eventually closed canopy climax woodland. With the herbivores present, like they would have been in our landscape, just a few thousand years ago, they fight back against succession, and they keep areas open. They hold scrub in a particular state for much longer than it would be if there wasn't any nibbling mouths. And of course, you will have trees and small copses coming up. That will happen in a wild situation, but also you have those open areas kept open as well. And so with the cattle, they're grazing like normal cows do, but they're also in the willow in the winter. So if they're feeding on bark and branches and leaves and more woody stuff. They're also finding stuff to graze on as well. But they're also in the hedges. They've got the heads in the hedges and in the scrub as well. So they're fairly ingenious. They've got to make their own living and get themselves through the winter. So we have about 100 breeding cows, and obviously they're young each year, and the bulls that are kept in a separate part of the project and are brought in sort of at the end of the summer to spend some time to run with the cows themselves. So 100 breeding cows. We have 6 Tamworth pig sows, and these sows are just in the southern block. They have a boar that comes and runs with them over the winter, and he's just about to leave. He's called the Ranger. He comes to visit and has a lovely time with them. He's done his job, and it's time for him to go home now. Come the spring, we'll see probably about 25 to 30 piglets in total, and the pigs will go off, find a hedge or somewhere quiet to hide away. They make a nest, normally out of vegetation like bracken and other soft vegetation, and they'll hide away for a few days, and they'll emerge with their little herd of piglets with them. So it's very lovely to see. And the pigs are here in lieu of the wild boar. So under the Dangerous Wild Animal Act, we can't reintroduce wild boar without significant electric fence, which would be very expensive to run over those kind of sized areas that we have at Knepp. So in lieu of the wild boar, we have the Tamworth, and they do exactly the same job. They're less aggressive, and they produce piglets quite readily as well. So they are a really important mover and shaker in the project. They do something called rootling. As you can see in the picture here, they use their snout as like a little plough where they go along underneath the soil, and they're sort of picking out roots and tubers and other starchy sort of goodies to eat, but they're also eating worms and beetles. They're grazing the summer. They might find a dead rabbit and they might eat a bit of that, and then they'll crunch away on freshwater mussels, sort of swan mussels, and in the autumn when we've got acorns, they'll really fatten up in sort of September, October time on acorns, which will then get them through the winter. So because we didn't have a very good acorn crop last year, this winter, it means that they've been doing a lot more rootling because they've got less fat to get them through the winter. So this has been really interesting for us to see sort of how much more rootling they do as a result of that. And then we have about 100 red deer between the middle and the southern block. They haven't been brought in as a proxy. They are actually themselves. They've been in our landscape for a long time. And they, again, are a grazer and a browser. And they were brought in a bit later on in the project in 2009 as a heavy hitter. So they do something called ring barking, where they're sort of chewing off the bark on sort of younger saplings, and they're pushing back against the succession. So especially with the sallow, they love the sallow, and it just kills those trees. It creates standing deadwood, which is an interesting habitat in itself for insects. But again, they're just pushing back against that sort of encroaching scrub, keeping it in check. We've got 2 herds of Exmoor ponies, one in the middle block and one in the southern block, and overall we've got 29 animals. Again, they're not brought in at night or in the winter. They're much hardier than a domestic horse. They feed on all sorts of items, such as you can see in the photo. They're eating thistle flowers, they eat hazelnuts off the woodland floor, they'll eat, they'll graze, they'll eat hawthorn. I've seen them eating roots and all berries, all sorts of stuff. They're very sort of hardy, and they're out all year round, and they run around in their little herds. And these are proxies for the wild horse that would have been in our landscape, sort of 20,000 years ago. If you look back at cave paintings from Lascaux, you can see something that looks very similar indeed to the Exmoor pony, and genetically it's not far off. They're doing the same kind of job in the landscape. And at the bottom here, we have the fallow deer. So we have huge herds of fallow deer. As I said, we're having quite a cull on them because they can get out of, the numbers can grow quite quickly of the fallow deer. So we're having a big cull on them at the moment to take their numbers back down again. And we have about 400 between the 2 blocks. But as I say, they're going to be much less after this winter. And there'll be lots of fallow venison for sale in our Knepp shop. And really, these guys, we all know they're not native. They were brought in by the Normans, but in previous interglacial periods, they would have been here naturally occurring, but a slightly bigger version of what we see now. We would have had the Clacton fallow deer and the Brown's fallow deer. And again, they've been brought in as grazers and browsers. And the idea behind all of these animals is that they bring natural processes to the landscape. So most nature reserves are target-led. You have a management plan, you have an idea in mind of the way you would like to manage your habitat. Whether it's heathland or coppice woodland or chalk grassland, there's a prescriptive way of managing it, and you'll write a management plan, and then you'll you'll monitor what species turn up there as a result of your management, and you can say, brilliant, all of these species have turned up, I'm hitting my targets, and I'm going to carry on with that target-led management plan. In rewilding, we can be a bit more process-led, especially at Knepp, where we've come from such a low baseline. And it's not about the target, it's about these natural processes that are being brought back in by these animals that are driving the project. So it's not about us going out of our chainsaws and brush cutters and tractors, to cut things back. It's the teeth and the ways these guys move around that affects the landscape, and it's a much more naturalistic way of managing the land. And there's a lot of nature reserves that are already doing this kind of thing, but then it's all but rewilding, except in name. For example, Wicken Fen up in Cambridgeshire, they've got extensive grazing with like very sort of spread out wild herds, and they've been doing this for much longer than rewilding's been going around in Britain. So we are in this very exciting time where a lot more people are thinking about using more natural ways of managing our landscape, which is a very exciting thing. So obviously it's about the way that these guys are feeding, the way they're fighting back against the succession, but it's also about the opportunities they're providing. So they're carrying seeds in their hooves and guts and trotters. They're distributing nutrients around the site in their dung, and we're not putting any pesticides through the cattle, for example, so no ivermectins to kill worms. So ultimately their dungs are fantastic for dung beetles and other insects that rely on that food source as well. Where the bulls come out in the autumn, they're hoofing at the ground, making nice bare patches. The pigs are rootling and making bare patches for insects to bask on as well, opportunities for bees to burrow down and nest in the ground as well. So there's lots of little niches that are being made by the disturbance from these animals. And of course, there's one thing that is missing at Knepp, and that is a predator. So we don't have wolves or lynx. We worked out if we were going to bring lynx back to Knepp, I think we could fit 1.5 lynx in, even though it's quite a large area. And we were working out what end we'd have. Would it be the front end or the back end of the half? So in lieu of the predator, we are the wolf at Knepp, and we harvest the meat because you can't have an ever-expanding population of herbivores. The numbers grow very quickly. So what we do is we are sort of keeping the numbers at a sort of manageable level that allows a habitat to do its thing, and to be able to allow us to have a profitable business as well. So that meat production helps fund the project and is sold sort of locally in restaurants and pubs and on our website for people to cook themselves. So we've moved very much from these monocultures, these kind of scenes at Knepp, through to a whole new culture, a new way of land management using these herbivores to drive the way for us. And what we're seeing is we're moved away from arable land, and actually if you walk around now it doesn't feel like it was ever arable. It feels very wild, but actually sort of during the agricultural revolution back in sort of the 1920s, not the revolution, agricultural depression, sorry, back in the 1920s, there was scrub at Knepp. It would have been very much like this because it was very marginal land and not worth farming, and it was abandoned. And we're seeing a kind of this kind of habitat coming up again, this kind of scrub, but at the same time you've got the large herbivores there helping to keep areas open. And we are seeing a really, really interesting thing where we've got little oak trees and other little tree saplings emerging. So we can thank the jay for moving the acorns around and getting these oak saplings growing. And because we've got the thorny scrub, so the bramble, the hawthorn, the blackthorn and the wild rose protecting those trees as they grow, we've got a little tree nursery going on. So no need for plastic collars and planting all these trees. Nature's done it for us. So this is really fascinating as we're thinking more about carbon, and more projects are talking about tree planting, and actually you can do it in a much more natural way that provides more habitat for wildlife whilst those trees are growing. So if you keep watching the screen here, you'll see the changes. So this is when a sort of aerial photograph at Knepp when it was a farm, and then going through to this wonderful wildland that we have here now. And hopefully this next one will show you a few stages of the edge of a wet field becoming something much more exciting. So this lovely scrape that was actually sort of dug out, very sort of a small amount of soil was taken out of this area just to provide maybe about 3 foot of water. And we have little grebe breeding there, and it's really great for scarce chaser dragonfly, which isn't a particularly common dragonfly here. So you can see how quickly this landscape can change. So that was just in 15 years, and it's just the most wonderful place filled with wildlife and sounds of nature compared to a soggy edge of a farmer's field just 15 years ago. The hedges have been allowed to grow out, so all of the hedges that were once felt within an inch of their life are now sprawling, full of nectar sources, full of opportunities for nesting birds. The old trees are still doing their thing. They're much happier now that they're not under the plough. And you can see the staghorn branches emerging from the top of this oak tree here. And that probably was in response to the effects of being under the plough. But the whole tree's recovered now, and it's got some rare fungi growing on that tree as well. Here's a picture of the lags I mentioned earlier on. So those little floodplain meadows provide all sorts of opportunities. They're like water holes for the herbivores, but again, wonderful for nesting birds, turtle doves, and dragonflies and that kind of thing. And the scrubland itself provides an amazing nectar source from March all the way through to September. So in March we have the sallow, followed by the blackthorn coming into blossom, then the hawthorn, then the bramble, then the wild rose. And then you go into fleabane, which is a yellow flower you can see there in the top right picture, and then into ragwort. And all of these are providing a really important nectar source for pollinators, and those pollinators go on to be food for small mammals, for birds, and so on, bats. And what we're recording at Knepp couldn't be done without the help of lots of amazing biological recorders that come and help us in their spare time, because they're enthusiastic about what's happening at Knepp and what we can learn from what's happening at Knepp. So we keep a big database of all the species that we're recording as we go on, and we're just sort of trying to draw all of this together into a big review at the moment to share what we've learned so far. So as we don't have targets, we have emergent properties or emerging properties. So they are, species that arrive, or, abundance of species that happen, things that we could never have dreamt or hoped for have, happened in this project. And it's very exciting. And it's kind of what gets you out of bed every day, because you think, oh, what am I going to go and see? What am I going to go and find out today? So overall, we've collected 30,000 records so far of about 3,000 species. 85 of those are nationally notable or scarce species. We've got 13 of the 18 UK bat species. Loads of lovely species like the scarce chaser, dragonfly I mentioned earlier on, and 30 red list birds either wintering or breeding at Knepp. So I do lots of structured surveys, some of them commissioned by professionals, some I do myself, others are done by amateur naturalists, and all of this feeds in to what we're learning at Knepp about the habitat and how it can change quite quickly and be great for wildlife. As well as the wildlife monitoring that we do, we are really only just delving into the world of what's happening with our soil, which is a whole new world for me. So I'm learning on the job with this. So really excited that Cranfield University have been helping us with this. And we've been able to compare our rewilded areas at Knepp to what's happening on neighbouring land that has continued to farm in the same way that Knepp used to be farmed. So we've got like a sort of running parallel to Knepp. We've got what would have happened if we'd carried on farming conventionally. And we've actually found we've got double the amount of organic carbon soil in just 20 years. We've got double the amount of microbial biomass in the soil. So that's all your bacterial biomass and all the goodies that make a functioning ecosystem. And then we've got an increase in fungal biomarkers as well. And this all helps make a functioning soil ecosystem again, which then means that you can go on to grow crops in it. So you could have pulses of rewilding happening across the UK on farmland that just needs a little boost to get nutrients back into the soil again to make it more productive. So you could have like little 15 or 20 year rewilding projects pulsing through the UK landscape and providing wonderful habitat for wildlife and for people as well. Just recently, we've been working with Queen Mary University of London. They've been helping us to actually quantify the habitat change, which is a huge job that we've been trying to do for years, and finally they've cracked it. So using digital scanning, sort of laser scanning technology called LiDAR, we've been able to show the amount of vegetation that we've gained at Knepp since moving away from conventional farming. And we're hoping that this could also quantify the amount of woody biomass, so looking at carbon sequestration ultimately as well. And we've actually shown that in 18 years, we've gained 1.3 million square metres of scrub, which to me just sounds completely bonkers. That's quite a lot of scrub. So for every 3 square metres that was farmlands, more than 1 square metre is now scrub. So you have to think of, how amazing that habitat is for wildlife and what that's doing for carbon sequestration as well. Also flood alleviation. So all of that scrub or leafy scrub during a sort of torrential downpours will be helping to slow the flow as it intercepts that heavy rain before it hits the soil. We're turning into a bit of a national and regional hotspot for a variety of different species. The top right-hand corner there, you can see the violet door beetle, Geotrupes mutata, which is quite a big dung beetle that hadn't been recorded in Sussex for 50 years. And we found quite a lot of them at Knepp. And certainly last year we found with a dung beetle group that we've got a considerable population of them. And again, this is because we're not putting any pesticides for our cows. It's providing a fantastic food resource for these dung beetles. I'm going to talk about all of these other species separately in a moment. One subject, there's so many different groups I could talk about, but I thought I'd pick bats as one of them. We had a bat survey done in 2009, and then it was repeated about 10 years later to see how things had changed for bats at Knepp. And that was mostly looking at the river restoration project area. And so this is the river restoration. You can see where the meanders have been put back in again. So this was canalised sort of during about 120 years ago to help get the flood water off of the farmland quickly. So the meanders have been put back in again, and that canalised part of the river has been dammed up. So this is now a functioning sort of floodplain again. It's got all sorts of wonderful flowers popping up there, great for insects, for sort of aquatic invertebrates, and it's gone on to be really good for bats as well. So alongside the river restoration, we've got a whole load of scrapes alongside it. So they also provide a great habitat and quite a different habitat to the river restoration area itself. So as well as the river restoration, we've got lots of dung with insects. We've got ancient trees, so the bats can glean insects off of the leaves on those ancient trees. We've got hedgerows and the lags that are providing corridors for the bats to commute in and out of Knepp or around Knepp. No pesticides means we've got lots of insects. We've got that lovely wet woodland around the mill pond. We've got open water and the river restoration. So all of these things are stacking up to be quite good for the bats. We're really excited to, in the most recent bat survey, to discover that we've got a Barbastelle bat rooster. They're one of our rarest bats in Europe. And we've discovered a roost on the river restoration itself. We found that this is a particular important area for foraging soprano pipistrelles, and we've seen significant increases in the number of Daurbentons and soprano pipistrelles caught as part of those surveys as well. We found that generally that river area was extensively used by the local bat population for feeding, and we think it's likely that the river restoration is providing optimal habitat for the female bats. So female bats get to pick the best habitat for foraging during breeding season, and the male bats will tend to go off to sort of less optimum feeding habitats. Because we're recording such a high ratio of female bats along the river, that was a fantastic sign and very different to 10 years ago before the river restoration happened. And also in the most recent surveys, we found that we had Becksteins and nocturnal bats also confirmed as breeding in that area. So really exciting to see all of these interesting results coming out of that project. On to birds. So we do lots of different bird surveys at Knepp, including breeding bird surveys and common bird census surveys. The breeding bird surveys, you tend to walk transects, so a line on a regular basis, and you record everything you hear within a set distance from your transect. The common bird census, you're walking the whole of your area and you're trying to map every bird you hear singing during breeding season, because ultimately it's on territory, and that gives you a really good idea about how many birds you've got of a particular species. How many singing birds you've got will tell you how many bird territories you've got. So this is really interesting. So this one here is probably one of our most abundant birds at Knepp, and it's the white throat. And this survey was done back in 2019. And Josie is very kindly, from her desk in Yateley, been helping to digitise this. And it's been a bit of a labour of love. So thank you, Josie, for doing that. So we found out we had 256 whitethroat territories. And, they're loving the scrub. And I'm going to come back to them a bit later on to do with this. Oh, no, actually, I think I can mention it now. So that LiDAR data I talked about from Queen Mary University, we've been able to overlay the whitethroat data over the top of that scrub data. And from that, we can see some really interesting things coming out of that. So you can see the exact kind of habitat they're liking. So they're liking the very edges of the thorny scrub. So the hawthorn on blackthorn, that's where they're, liking to be for their nesting. Also, as well as sort of the bird surveys that we do, we often get rarities turning up. So over COVID, when sort of during lockdown, when I was sort of doing surveys and a few other local people were helping with surveys, we found some very exciting things, including hoopoe, golden oriole, and great white egret, all very exotic looking birds turning up at Knepp. We do quite a lot of ringing at Knepp, especially during the autumn migration months. So it's sort of like normally July through to October time. And it's a fantastic way of finding out what's utilising the scrub during that time, but also a really good way of engaging with people. So we run a safari business at Knepp to get people excited about rewilding, and showing them some of the birds that we catch is a particularly exciting thing. Excuse me. And it really has, for us, highlighted the importance of the scrub, especially in the autumn, where birds are starting to move around a bit, starting to get ready for either migrating back down south for the winter or for fattening up for the winter. So in an average autumn, we'll catch maybe about 1,500 birds. We probably ring a couple of times a week at that time of the year. And as you can see, the list there, blackcaps very much comes out near the top with sort of 41% of our catch being blackcaps. And you can see here on the right, there's a lovely male blackcap on the right, and on the left, a female blackcap. And they're really just fattening up on the blackberries and the other berries that the wildland offers. And sometimes we might catch a bird again a couple of weeks later, and you can really we weigh them, and you can see the difference in their weight, that they've built up a bit of weight, probably put down a bit of muscle to help them on their migration. So the scrubland really has got a lot of food resource for all of these birds, whether it's fruit or insects during their migration during the autumn. And normally during the winter, we're doing a bit of redwing and fieldfare ringing. We haven't done much this winter yet, but it's a great time of year to be out in the scrubland and redwing. You can hear them all chacking and chattering from the scrub at night time as they're coming into roost. So I'm hoping that over the next couple of months we can do a bit with redwings before they head off to their breeding grounds again. Every now and again we're lucky to catch woodcock. You can see up in the right hand corner there. This particular one was a really exciting one, because we ringed it at Knepp, and about a month or two later we'd had a recovery on it. We thought, oh gosh, where's that? So we've got the little metal ring that's got a unique number on it. You kind of hope that someone's either going to catch it somewhere else and let you know, or let you know if they find it dead. And this unfortunately had been shot, but interestingly, it had been shot for the pot by a Russian hunter, and it was just outside Moscow. So really interesting, I think that's our furthest away bird that we've recorded from Knepp so far. So interesting to see, these birds are coming to, places in the UK for their winter months, and then going back to sort of Russia or Scandinavia for breeding. I love that kind of thing. And one bird we do provide an artificial habitat for in Knepp is the barn owl. So we've got lots of barn owl boxes dotted around, and we have had quite high numbers of chicks in the past, but last year was not a very good year. We only had 3 young. I think it was across the board. It wasn't a particularly good year for barn owls last year. So I like to use technology for recording as well, and I've been using a drone to record what's in our heronry. And actually, when we went up with the drone, we realised we had 5 times more nests than we thought we had, that we could count from the ground. And the really interesting thing is that you can see how many eggs they've laid. So in this nest here, there's 1 egg. and how many chicks. So this nest here on the left has got a couple of chicks in it. So it's really interesting when you start sort of looking around at who's doing what and at what stage they're at. And this is quite a nice sort of little zoom in on a nest that's got 3 quite big young. And you can see how much the nests stand out against the winter sort of vegetation. It's just because it's very early spring. But from the guano, from the young or the adults sitting on the nest, it makes them stand out quite well. And these 3 probably weren't too far for fledging, I shouldn't have thought. Now to talk about some of our jewels in our crown. So the nightingale really is sort of one of the most spectacular success stories of Knepp. So these have seen a 92% decline in 48 years across the UK. But last year we had about 40 singing males at Knepp in total, sort of on the regenerative farm and the rewilding project. But they've seen sort of 11% decline nationally in 10 years, which is pretty bad. So really interesting that we've got an increasing number of nightingales against a backdrop of a declining graph nationally. So they are enjoying the growing out hedges, so they'll be nesting right out on the edge of these hedge, pretty much on the ground. So they like these big kind of cathedral structure like hedgerows. They'll be nesting down here on the edge. And again, we try to have a bit of an effort on catching these, and we're trying to ring as many adults and young as we can so that we can see which ones are returning on an annual basis. So we can see there's a little nestling here on the left being ringed by Dave. And then top right left hand corner, we've got a couple of juveniles that were in the scrub during the autumn. And then on the right here is one of the adults that we caught at Knepp last year. And really interesting, we've been ringing nightingales for quite a few years now. We're just starting to get some interesting results. So my friend is the ecologist up at Gatwick Airport, and there's some actually really nice habitat around Gatwick. I didn't realise until she started working there. And one day last year, she said, one of my bird surveyors has just spotted a nightingale with a ring. I thought, gosh, that's interesting. So Dave and I went up to the exact area where the nightingale was. We put up a net just before dusk. And lo and behold, we managed to catch the nightingale. And amazingly, it was a bird that we'd ringed at Knepp the year before. And it turned up at Gatwick and it was breeding at Gatwick. So it was really exciting. There's me and Rachel, the ecologist, were celebrating. You have to celebrate with chocolate biscuits. It's good fun. And another nightingale that we had reported to us last year was just 15 miles north of Knepp, and it was found moribund on a very cold April morning. I don't know if you remember, it was quite frosty and cold last April, and I guess it must have just arrived and was not doing too well. And the guy that picked up happened to be a ringer. He was just on his local patch having a walk and found this sort of moribund nightingale, and he thought it had died, but he managed to take it home and put it on a hot water bottle and warmed it up. The same afternoon he released it, and it was singing again from the bushes that evening. And within a couple of weeks he'd found a pair, his female. And so a really interesting thing about this nightingale is that it was also ringed, and it was a bird that had bred at Knepp also the previous year, and had successfully fledged 4 young. So nightingales are normally quite site faithful, and if a bird successfully breeds, they're likely to come back to the same spot. So really interesting that these 2 nightingales that we caught last year had been at Knepp the previous year. So could we be helping to stock up local surrounding nature reserves of nightingales, or was it just a chance thing? I don't know. But this kind of ringing will help us over time work out hopefully what's happening. And eat more chocolate biscuits, most importantly. Then on to turtle doves, and this is one of the most spectacular results as well. So turtle doves have seen a whopping 98% decline in 48 years. So you have to think in a lifetime, this bird has nearly gone extinct. But last year we had about 20 singing males at Knepp, and again, sort of bucking the trends of this declining bird. And this has seen an 82% decline in just 10 years in the UK. So it's very much in dire straits. Very excited to say that we've now collaborating with the RSPB. We're going to have a turtle dove research assistant based at Knepp for 5 months this year, and they're going to be helping us catch catch turtle doves to put radio tags on them, so we can find out a bit more about where they're spending their time in the area, where they're feeding, where they're breeding, that kind of thing. So very excited to be working with the RSPB on that. So the turtle doves are, in these thickets, growing out hedges and thickets, like sparse trees or dead trees to sit and sing from. They love these lags, these little watery areas, because as a seed eater, they need fresh water, easy access to fresh water. But also, whilst the young in the nest, quite within the first few days, they're feeding them on the nutritious crop milk that pigeons and doves produce for their young. And this is actually a turtle dove territory here, and this is a dead tree that it sings from back at the back of the photo there. But also, one thing we'd really like to learn is, can we link the pigs to the turtle dove? So the Tamworth pigs, where they're rootling, they're allowing lots of little arable weeds to get a foothold in the wake of where they've been, basically. And the turtle dove feeds on the seed of those arable weeds. So it'd be really interesting if there is a link there. And also, basically kind of vetches, trefoils, scarlet pimpernels, clovers, all of these little plants that have got tiny seeds that the turtle dove feeds on. And also, because the turtle doves are quite little and they've got short legs, these kind of little roots in could be helping them get into their food source. So it'd be really interesting with this radio tracking project to see if the pigs are helping the turtle doves in that way. On to insects. So loads of different insects recorded at Knepp, over 1,800 different insect species. So that's over half of the species recorded at Knepp are insects, which is quite amazing, really. And you can see a breakdown of the different groups there, with beetles and butterflies and moths being the top taxonomic groups that we have records for. So we have a lot to do with Graham Lyons, who's an amazing entomologist. He spends quite a lot of time at Knepp doing various surveys for us, and they include lots of active searching. So he's got nets that he's beating trees to get things to fall out, and pond dipping, turning over logs, hoovering things up with like a vacuum cleaner thing. And he's doing these repeatable surveys, so every 5 years we can sort of look at how the invertebrate assemblage is changing. So in 2015, he recorded 567 species, and 2020 he recorded 656 species, with 7% of those species with some kind of conservation status. And he's always finding interesting things wherever he goes. New for West Sussex, and not recorded in Sussex for 50 years. Nationally scarce species all over the place, and he always finds some really interesting things. Martin Drake, who's a dipterist, so he's a fly recorder, came to Knepp about in 2019, I think it was, and he discovered a new species of fly to Britain, which is this lovely kind of emerald green dolichopodid, and it likes kind of cattle poached areas and sort of wet clay soils, which we have obviously both of those in a good number, so hopefully it's got a thriving colony at Knepp. Last year we found a nationally rare bee fly, or Villa cingulata, which is quite cool. And what it does is it's a parasite, so the larvae are parasitic of other insects. So what it does is the adult will dip its abdomen in dust and grit, and then as the eggs are emerging, the sticky egg will get all the grit attached to it, and it'll flick its bum towards the host nests, and is like a little bomb, because you've got an egg that's got lots of weight on it from the grit, and it gives it a bit of extra projection. So then it's kind of flicking its eggs into other bee nests, and then when the eggs hatch out, the larvae can feed on the other bee larvae. But as an adult, they're a really important pollinator, and they're not parasitic at the adult stage. But just really fascinating life cycles of these little insects. We found rose chafer on the left, a lovely sort of a beautiful kind of bottle green chafer beetle at Knepp last year, and also southern migrant hawker. We seem to have a breeding colony of them, so it's quite an unusual dragonfly. It's just starting to move into the UK. Other dragonflies that we've got, we recorded small red last year, and you guys are probably used to seeing small red damselflies on the heathland where you are, but for us to see small red is quite unusual, because we're definitely not a heathland acidic site. It's got 26 different species of dragonfly recorded. Moths, so I like my mothing. So we do record quite a lot of moths. There's still a lot more to find out there. So we put moth trap out, but also we're using pheromone lures to lure in the clearwings that you can see on the right there, and the lunar hornet moth. And we're also looking for leaf miner micro moths as well. So you can see on the leaf in the picture there. This is found on hop leaves in the hedges, and it's quite a nice one to spot because it's like a little high five, like the moth's giving you a little high five. So it's a nice, easy one to recognise their gallery mines from. So far we've got 527 species of moths recorded. And of two of particular note, a rush wainscot that's confined to just 5 areas in the UK and potentially in danger of extinction in Sussex. So it hadn't been seen at Knepp since 2005, and I'd been trying several years to try and find it again, and finally found it in 2017 on the Hammer Pond. So really nice. So that's a nationally scarce species, as is the slow carpet, which is a moth, not surprisingly, that is found on blackthorn, and it likes mature stands of blackthorn. It's confined to South and East England, in serious danger of extinction in West Sussex, only found in 3 sites, one of which is my back garden. I didn't put it there, honest. The larval food plant solely blackthorn, and it was last recorded at Knepp in 1995, and I thought it must be there with all this blackthorn that we've got at Knepp now. So we went, every sort of April looking for it, and finally caught it by accident during a nightingale survey a couple of years ago, when my head torch was shining on my clipboard and a moth was attracted into the light, and lo and behold, it was a slow carpet. And then last year, 3 more were caught in 2021. So hopefully it's breeding on site again, which is great. Butterflies, so 62 different species have been recorded in Sussex. 52 butterflies were recorded in the 2015 Sussex Butterfly Atlas, and we've recorded 37 species at Knepp. And I think we've got all of the species that we could probably see at Knepp now that are likely to be found at Knepp. And so that's, again, not bad coming from a very low baseline. So on our butterfly surveys in 2005, we recorded 13 species. And in 2020, we recorded, doubled the amount of butterfly species we'd recorded, with some post-rewilding colonists, including marbled white that you can see on the right there, small heath in the middle, and that's Essex skipper on the left, and also brown argus and brown hairstreak and purple emperor. Purple emperor, we've seen a huge number of purple emperors turning up because they like the males keep territories over the large oak trees. The females need a sallow to lay their eggs on, so it's kind of willow that we have at Knepp. And sallow isn't particularly common in our wide landscape because it's not a plant that people like. It's fairly, it grows very quickly. Foresters don't like it, farmers don't really like it, but it's a really important nectar source for all sorts of early insects, and it's a food plant for a lot of larvae, including the purple emperor larvae. So in a way, we can link the pigs to the success of the purple emperor, because where the pigs rootle, it makes an open substrate that can then get wet in the spring. The sallow seed that flies around in May then comes and settles in those bare, wet areas and gets growing. And it's the younger growth that the caterpillars particularly like. They like the sort of the nice sort of juicy leaves on the younger growth of the sallow. So we've seen a bumper number of purple emperors, and we're now the best site in the UK for a species of butterfly that was once considered to be a woodland species, and we're certainly not a woodland. So, we're pushing these species to sort of less optimal habitats through our behaviour in the landscape in the past. So just to talk about a couple of things just before I finish up. So beavers. So after about 18 months of paperwork, government paperwork, we finally were able to release beavers a couple of Novembers ago. And as you can see, that's the male one coming out of his carry cage. And if you watch the video there, hopefully we'll see. You have to excuse it because there's a film crew in the background here, but you should be able to see that the male beaver emerging out of his the carry cage there. He's quite chilled out, having just come from Scotland. They caught up on the River Tay, the Tay catchment, where they were no longer required by farmers up there, sort of not welcome on their land, so they've been rehomed here. Here's the female, and she's less chilled out. She's a bit more sassy. She's kind of slightly more stressed out. So we just let her go into the water. And that was probably the last time those two beavers saw each other. So it was a male and a female. And within 2 weeks, the male had escaped downstream and the female had escaped upstream. Both ended up on fishing lakes, so it made it quite easy for us to catch them up again. And this is the male just swimming around in the water, just getting to know his new territory before he headed off. So since then, let me see if I've got. So we obviously had trail cameras out, so we were recording where we were seeing them and knowing that they were there, which was good. So it's quite fun to watch them sort of swimming around, exploring their new habitat. This one here, I think that's the male, looking very busy, like he's on a mission, probably just about to escape. It's in November, so by the end of November, they'd both escaped. That's the female, Billy. And also Billy came across a fox. So it got 45 minutes of photographs of a beaver and a fox hanging out together. The fox was jumping all around everywhere, really excited at the sight of a beaver. And I thought, God, this is the first Sussex fox to have seen a beaver in probably about 500 years. That's very exciting. They weren't bothered by each other, and I thought it felt like a bit like a wind in the willows or something. But the male, when he went downstream, this was a big problem. So the female, because she went upstream, obviously it fizzles out and you can catch them up. Going downstream meant that the male went back onto the main river Ada, which goes down to Shoreham by sea, with the word sea in it. And, he potentially could have gone out to sea and been lost. He was ranging about 25 kilometres. So it's very difficult to know where to put the traps when you've got a beaver sort of travelling those kind of distances. So it wasn't really till after Christmas, about this time last year actually, when we were able to catch him up again, when he settled in sort of the upper reaches on an organic farm, which was nice. And it was really interesting to see people's reactions. Everyone out doing their sort of daily activities. We were in sort of another lockdown at that point, loving seeing these the beavers out and about, and the farmers saying, what can we do to make our rivers better for beavers in the future? And, the fishermen even, just delighted to be seeing them on the river again. So finally we're able to catch the male up. But sadly, the male died shortly after. He'd got a bacterial infection. It's like a wild a thing that wild animals and birds catch. It's called Yersinia pseudotuberculosis, and unfortunately turned into septicemia, and he died, and that was really upsetting. Obviously not great for him, but very upsetting for us, because we'd really got to know him through watching him and getting to know all the local people as well. But while he was out, he was flying the flag for beaverkind and doing his thing. Billy the beaver female, we caught her up again and we kept her in captivity for a while, because our semi-enclosed pen, which was a kind of part of a national trial, definitely wasn't holding beavers in, so we thought we needed to rethink about what we were doing. So she actually ended up going off to a National Trust project on the Sussex Hampshire border, and she's having a lovely time then, been really busy at work and creating lots of lovely habitat. And so we have, for the moment, put aside the semi-enclosed pen idea, and now we've got a completely enclosed pen of about 2 hectares on a lovely bit of stream at Knepp, and hopefully in the next few weeks we'll be releasing a new pair of beavers there, and hopefully the fence holds them in this time because it's completely enclosed, and then they can really get to work and we can sort of look at the habitat that they can create on a clay catchment. So that's very exciting. And just to finish up, talk a bit about our stalk project. So I don't know if you've seen any of the white stalks from the reintroduction project up in Yateley direction, but one of the main drivers for this project was to bring white stalks back as a breeding bird to the UK. Obviously every year we get them as migrants coming in, but never in big enough numbers for them to settle in a colony to breed. So we have been working with Warsaw Zoo, who rehabilitate injured birds, and we've been importing them and then keeping them in an enclosed pen. Sort of it's got no roof on it, but it is kind of fox proof. where we're clipping their wings and stopping them from flying for the first 2 winters, so it kind of hefts them to the site. And then after 2 winters, their primary feathers are allowed to grow back again, and they can be free flying. Not all of the birds will ever fly again, because some of them had bad injuries from when they were in Poland, so where they've hit power lines and been rehabilitated. So the ones that can't fly create a hub that is the tipping point for that colony to sort of build on. The flying birds are then going off and actually making their own nests. And last year we had 7 nests at Knepp. But we've also got a pen in East Sussex at Wadhurst. We've got a pen in Surrey at Wintershall Estate. And the idea is that over time we build up, 3 small colonies that then start spilling out into the wider landscape. We want them nesting amongst villages and towns and getting people excited about these big birds being back in their landscape again. So last year we had 7 nests. I think we had 14 young successfully fledged from them. Again, I was out with my drone, practicing my drone flying, and you can see the number of eggs, and that helps us monitor, when they're laying their eggs, so we can work out when they're going to hatch and then when we can ring them. So it's very important that we put metal rings with a unique number on these birds, but also a big plastic ring that's got again, a unique number that's individual to that bird, but one that bird watchers can spot in the field. It has like GB and then a couple of digits. That means we can then identify the individuals. And so most of the nests they built in oak trees, but really excitingly, one of them was on the castle roof, on Isabella Tree's chimney, on her study chimney, and you can see the tiny chick sticking its head up. And we're very excited that they're already back on the roof, and there's been some stick carrying going on. So we're hoping there might be even more nests popping up on the castle roof this year. So we've got a few photos there of the storks and all the people that came to see them, especially during COVID. It was all about engaging people in these big, exciting birds coming back to our skies. It was a very exciting time. There you go, there's one of the young in the nest. By that time, they look very beautiful, but they're very smelly by that time, because they spent quite a lot of weeks in that nest. So 2 other projects just wanted to talk about briefly that are going on at Knepp. One is the regenerative farm, and that is in that area around Shipley Village. And the idea here is that we've taken back pony paddocks and other tenanted fields, and we are mob grazing them. So we have animals, you can see our Sussex red cattle there, are moving through those fields and moved on pretty much every day onto new pastures. These fields last year were just full of wildflowers and buzzing insects, so we could already see an amazing improvement on what it would previously been like in those fields. The idea is that we're growing food that is much better for the environment, better for wildlife, better for people, and getting soil health as a top priority there as well. So we're doing all sorts of surveys to help monitor what happens from the beginning of the project, looking at bees, butterflies, birds, looking at dung beetles. We're making these little dung traps here. It was a delightful job. And bird surveys and so on, just to see how these fields recover quite quickly under a new farming regime. And also next to the castle, we've got a lovely old Victorian walled garden, and that is being completely rewilded as well by Tom Stewart Smith, a famous horticulturalist and garden designer. And again, the idea is to show how wildlife changes in these areas. So we're doing lots of different wildlife surveys, birds, butterflies, moths, dragonflies, and so on, to see how the things change there as well. So very exciting times at Knepp. It never sits still. We're always very busy, always lots of new things going on. If you've enjoyed this evening's talk, do tune in on my podcast. Loads of lovely episodes with some of the different specialists that come and visit, and I go for a nice walk with them. We talk about anything from nightingales through to purple emperors through to the regenerative farm. And I've just our 16th episode is just out, and that was with Isabella Tree herself talking about the scrubland. So do tune into that if you've enjoyed this evening. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be very happy to take some questions if we've got some time.
I'll make a start on some of the questions we've already had. Is ragwort a problem for the ponies at Knepp?
That's a very good question, and one we get asked a lot. In fact, in Izzy's book, there's a whole chapter about ragwort, yellow peril, as we call it. For us, we love ragwort, mostly because of its importance for our pollinators as a nectar source. But from an animal welfare point of view, normally ragwort is a problem when it's dried and rolled up in hay and then fed accidentally to horses. Because the ragwort is standing and live, they don't eat it. There's plenty of other stuff for them to eat. So we don't have problems with ragwort. We've never had problems with it, I'm pleased to say.
Thank you. Other than the lynx that you mentioned, do you have any plans to introduce any more animals or birds at this time?
So we've got the beavers coming soon, hopefully, and we've got the storks, which is an ongoing project. There's potential for potentially the redback shrike. So we're just working with the RSPB in Natural England on, we're just rustling up a feasibility study, which we're about halfway through at the moment. But really with the shrike, it would be looking at if it was feasible to have it in a wider landscape and not just at Knepp. So we'll be looking at landscape recovery as part of that. So that fits very well into the government's new environmental land management subsidy. So that's one thing we're looking at, and we've got backing from RSPB and Natural England on that. And potentially we might be looking at black-veined white butterfly, which is a hawthorn and blackthorn butterfly. Again, we need to do a feasibility study on that to see if it's something we can do. And yeah, sort of watch that space on this one. So they're the sort of the main ones for the moment. Another potential could be water vole, but we really need to eradicate mink as well as we can do on the catchment. And that's something we might be working with, because we've got a farmer group in our area, the Upper Ada Farmer Group. We'd need to work with them to help eradicate the mink. And so we've got to work out a way of funding that and getting that off the ground. So it's another sort of one on the back burner at the moment. So there's always lots of ideas whizzing around.
This question sort of follows on, you've sort of covered it. How do you decide which species to reintroduce?
So with the herbivores, we're very much looking for proxies for animals that would have been here, so with the same kind of mouth parts and ways of feeding of animals that would have been here in the past. But for new sort of species that aren't perhaps keystone species like the beaver, which is obviously an obvious one, we're looking at potentially ones that do play a keystone part in our habitats and sort of the wider ecosystem, but also we're looking for species that potentially are, not going to make their way back here naturally. So if we think there's a shred of a chance that a species could come back to Knepp naturally, we'd try and leave it and monitor what happens. So for example, hedgehog was a good one. We were approached saying, well, you haven't seen hedgehog at Knepp for 20 years, they're unlikely to come back naturally. And weirdly, the following year I started doing surveys for them, and loads of them started turning up, and just because the habitat has kind of got back to a good state again. So I'm really glad we held off on that one. Okay. So yeah, really we're sort of looking at ones that won't come back naturally by themselves, that just need a helping hand. Like the white stork, it needs like a good number of them to create the hub for a colony, and that's not going to happen naturally.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Why has there been such a massive decline in the nightingale numbers and the turtle dove numbers?
Good question. So for nightingale, we're probably looking at, there's not so much kind of scrub and sprawling hedgerows in our landscape anymore. So they were then more reliant on coppiced woodland. And then coppiced woodland is kind of, no one's really coppicing as much anymore. Woodland isn't being worked like it used to be. And they're just saying, there isn't the right kind of habitat for them to keep them going. I'm sure there's probably other factors at play here as well, sort of like their wintering grounds and migration. But really, yeah, I think that's sort of one of the main ones is woodland management. Also deer pressure, ironically. Obviously we've got deer at Knepp, but deer pressure in woodlands really does take out a lot of the understory, and that will be where, especially in coppice woodlands, that will be where the nightingale would be wanting to nest, in those kind of little scrubby, brambly bits that come up in coppice woodland. So that's the nightingale. a turtle dove that's got so many different problems. So it gets something called trichomoniasis, which is something that swells up the kind of the trachea, I think is called. So it means it can't swallow its food, and all the food starts backing up. And that's a problem we're seeing in a whole host of different bird species, like buntings and finches and so on. So that's one big problem affecting it. There's less kind of spilt grain in our landscape, less little arable weeds to feed on, less nesting habitat as well. Again, the kind of scrubbiness and the growing out hedges that these species need. So these are some of the main things that are missing on our side of, the pond, as it were. And then during migration, something like 75,000 pairs are killed on migration every year, and that's not sustainable. They're declining in number anyway. We're then having that effect of, being shot over Malta and Italy and Spain and so on by hunters. And then they have problems with desertification in their wintering grounds as well. So they've got it coming from every angle, poor turtle doves. But we can certainly do our bit in the UK to help them. And Operation Turtle Doves doing a fantastic job of helping them with that. So supplementary feeding, and also getting farmers to plant arable weed seed plants that they can then feed on. But really, a lot of that is kind of sticky plasters and a quick fix to stop them going extinct. But really, we need some more long-term solutions, and perhaps rewilding will provide the opportunities that turtle doves need for long-term survival in the landscape.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to group a few of them together now. There's a number of people who are asking, can one visit? And if so, going on to another question, when would be the best time to visit?
Great question. Yeah, so we have loads of footpaths and bridleways, and because we became quite popular following Izzy's book, and then also through lockdown when everyone was doing their daily activities at Knepp, we've got a whole new sort of car park system as well set up. So if you just look up, sort of visiting Knepp Rewilding on the internet, you'll find it. I can always send a link to you guys to pass on to the society. We also have camping and glamping, so you can come and stay right in the heart of the rewilding project in lovely kind of tree houses and yurts and that kind of thing. And also safaris. So if you'd like a guided tour with an ecologist that can tell you all about what you're looking at, that's a really good way to come and see the site. We do everything from nightingale suppers through to dawn choruses and all sorts of lovely things like that. I would say if you had to pick one time of year to come, I would come sort of at the end of April, early May. So you've got your nightingales singing, and hopefully your turtle doves have just come back to a good chance. Another nice time of year is also probably the first week of July, when the purple emperors are on the wing, and you can pick up a special purple emperor map that will take you to the hot spots, and they're paths that you can't normally go on during the rest of the year. So lots of opportunities for exploring.
Lovely, thank you. Actually, you raised the point about the safaris. One of the questions was, how do we get details on the safaris?
If you just tap Knepp Safaris into Google, you'll find a whole website about the safaris, and we've got lots of different things on offer at the moment. So get in quick, they do sell quickly.
Okay. What is the rarest wild flower on the estate?
Oh, the rarest. I think probably we have water violet, which is quite a rare one, and it's only found in the clean water ponds. So they're in wet areas that aren't fed by a stream, so they're kind of isolated ponds. It's very lovely. It's not a violet. I think it's actually a type of forget-me-not, but it's quite big pink flowers. It's very pretty indeed. I think that's probably one of the rarer plants that we've got at Knepp.
Okay. Before the project started, I imagine your income came primarily from crops. Where does your income come from now?
Good question. So previously we were also getting subsidies, and we carried on getting subsidies, but rather than getting subsidies for producing not much productivity, not high yields rather, we're now producing wildlife with those subsidies. So we get kind of countryside stewardship, which helps bolster the income to the estate, helps employ people like me. We have the safari and camping business, which is going really well. That's been going for about 8 years now, and it's been really successful, and just loads of people wanting to come and visit, which is fantastic. We have our meat business, so the animals that are harvested from the project are sold through our website. We've got the Knepp Wild range. You can do click and collect, or you can mail order meat, so it arrives in a special refrigerated truck. So that provides 75 tons of live weight meat a year, so it's quite a lot of meat coming off the project. And we've just invested in our own butchery, and we've got a whole butchery team now, so we're producing that on site. And then we've got some old dairy barns and units that aren't being used for dairy anymore, or for collecting all your wheat. So these are now sort of adapted into office space and sort of factory space and so on for ethical local companies to work from. And we're just in the middle of renovating a load of old barns, and that's going to be a big farm shop and cafe, and it's going to be selling produce from the rewilding project, the regenerative farm, and we just got a new market garden setting up as well. They're just starting to put the seeds in the ground for that. So all of this helps keep the estate going. It helps employ, there's over about 50 members of staff, plus loads of contractors as well. So it's employing loads of people locally, and it's a fantastic thing for the economy, really, and showing that you can, make profit from rewilding and doing something good for the environment.
Okay, thank you. What vet support do you have, and how active is the vet in interacting with the wildlife?
So we have 2 stockmen, so they're out checking the animals. So obviously we don't just abandon the animals and hope for the best. We need to make sure that they're happy and healthy every day. So we're checking the pigs and the ponies and the cattle. And we have a great vet called Martin, who he's on call all the time. So he's a farm vet. So if any of the animals need attention, he'll come out and help with that.
Lovely. Josie has very kindly shared a link here, public footpaths / bridleways at Knepp. So thank you, Josie, for that. If anybody wants to see that, that's in the chat. I don't have any more questions on chat unless anybody else wants to quickly fire anything over. I think we've covered everything from the ones that have been sent so far. So that's me done. Thank you, Penny.
Brilliant.